It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative MP Siobhan Bailey, Labour MP Stephen Kinnock, Darren Grimes from the free market think tank the IEA and founder of the polling firm Britain Thinks, Deborah Mattinson. Today...
Hello. Year 4, isn't it?
Keir Starmer brushes off claims his campaign is guilty of misusing data.
I can say categorically that this did not happen.
As the coronavirus death toll in China rises, 4 more are diagnosed in the UK. Sinn Féin's leader claims there's been a revolution at the Irish ballot box. And is this what levelling up means?
I think it is time that, that we start looking outside of London and looking at what the whole country is able to do.
Definitely.
Let's talk about the government's response to the coronavirus. We heard in the headlines there, more cases in the UK. The government has declared coronavirus a serious and imminent threat to public health, raising the level. Now, the reason they've done this is to keep people in isolation for their own safety. Someone was threatening to abscond from quarantine in Arrow Park in the Wirral. Has the government done the right thing, Siobhan?
Yes, and I think we should be proud of the government and the NHS response and how it's been handled so far. I mean, the announcement is all about strengthened regulations about the quarantine. It's the legal underpinning of the quarantine and the isolation process, and we saw most people had signed up to that voluntarily, but we want to make sure that that legal process is behind it. And I think that we've got to give confidence to the public. We don't want anyone panicking. There's no need to panic. So it's really important that we have everything in place. And I think the NHS has really done well with that.
Right. The overall risk remains moderate, says the government. So are they frightening people by raising it, even though they say there is a reason to legally compel people to stay in isolation?
I think we, of course, have to err on the side of caution. But I do wonder about this contract that people were made to sign when they got on the aeroplane. Why was it voluntary? I mean, they seem to be given a piece of paper which, frankly, is worthless, meaningless, and if this person wishes to abscond, apparently it's possible to do so. I think we need a much tighter approach from government on that, and I think it's regrettable that they've put a piece of paper in front of people which doesn't actually hold water.
I mean, Stephen is right. People were asked to sign contracts, but obviously this didn't compel people to stay in isolation. Does that surprise you, that actually the government didn't have the legal sort of power to force people?
What the government was doing was making sure that they were acting as quickly as they possibly could. It took a few steps to get to this legal underpinning stage, and I think that, as we've seen, most people signed up very willingly to that, and we're very happy to do so.
Darren?
I think for the most part the government's handled it as well as they possibly could. I think looking at this if you take a step back and actually look at the impact that this will have on the global economy, for example, I think Trump's tariffs won't have a look in as far as the relationship with China is concerned. And we will have to start looking at diversification of the international trading system, for example, because China is so deeply embedded within all of these supply chains that actually we're going to have to start having those conversations as well as how to deal with the response to the virus spreading, because it is incredibly transmissible.
Darren thinks the government has handled it well up until now. It is quite risky, isn't it, for governments in these situations, because health crises are at the forefront of people's minds. It's important they get it right.
And the NHS has now overtaken Brexit as the thing that people are most concerned about, the biggest issue of concern. So it's interesting that this is Boris Johnson's first crisis. Proper crisis, and I think people will be watching very, very carefully to see how he copes. I was working for Gordon Brown during the summer of 2010 when we had the foot and mouth crisis and the flooding, and actually that was his high point. His ratings soared when he cancelled his holiday,
came back early,
immediately convened Cobra and was running around the country in wellies. it was the right thing to do, and it remains to be seen if Boris Johnson will act as promptly. But I think he probably needs to. He needs to be seen to be out there and dealing with it.
I mean, there have been stories over the weekend that people are boycotting Chinese restaurants or Chinatown because of the coronavirus. I mean, is this the sort of thing that the government need to get sort of to grips with?
Well, it's very important that you know, the primary responsibility of any government is the security of its citizens. But to Darren's point on global trade, I mean, I think it really underlines how weak and exposed we are now with this global Britain idea that we're going to go out and seek trade deals with countries which have absolutely nothing like the food standards that we require. Let's not forget where the coronavirus started and how it started, and then compare that to the extremely stringent and high standards we have for trading with the European Union. So I think there's a big question here, not just around the economy, but also around health and public safety when you're starting to pursue new trade policies.
Just before everyone responds, I think we can show you some pictures of the plane landing yesterday in rather stormy conditions, of course, because of Storm Kira, arriving back into RAF Bryce Norton, bringing back Britons from China. Siobhan, you wanted to say something in response?
I just want to say, I mean, there's two elements to this. The starting point is for making sure the government has a really good, strong flow of information. Everything the government is doing is backed up by experts, and we will adapt as we go along with the expert advice. What Stephen's referring to with the trade, I mean, it's very early days at the moment, and we need to look quite carefully at that for British companies and how we're trading. And I'm sure Darren's nodding at me.
Absolutely, I completely agree. But I do think to try and use coronavirus as a scare tactic into Britain's trading position in the world, you know, this country has some of the highest standards in the world. No one's suggesting that's going to change. So I do find that argument to be slightly disingenuous.
Well,
Stephen.
Darren, optimism is not a strategy. And the argument I'm making is that we will take a hit in our trade with Europe because there'll be more friction. The government's policy is to fill the gap that will cause by striking trade deals with the likes of the United States and China. Well, we've seen with the United States it's all about chlorinated chicken, and the health and safety standards in China are non-existent compared to European standards. So it's simply the reality to point out the risks.
Not, is it? The European Union itself says that chlorinated chicken, American chicken, is perfectly safe. I mean, to try and compare it to the Chinese, I think is incredibly disingenuous.
I am flagging up a massive risk that we're taking with the new trade
Don't talk
policy.
over each other, but go on, Stephen. Let Stephen finish his point, and then I'll come to you, Siobhan. Go on.
I'm simply flagging up a risk. When you're looking at issues of viruses and health and safety of our citizens, you've got to have a very hard-headed look at risk. And when you're pursuing a new trade policy, you've got to go into that with open eyes.
Right,
That's
well, we
all I'm
weren't
saying.
talking about Brexit, but here we are. This reminds me of earlier conversations before Christmas. Yes, finally.
No, I just want to say, as Deborah said, you know, the top on the public's agenda is health and NHS. You know, the fact that it gets sidetracked immediately by the Labour Party and onto a Brexit, we've got to focus on the security and health of our public, and that's what the government's doing.
Let's move on and talk about Labour. Let's show this headline in the Times newspaper today. Labour at war after Starmer campaign accused of hacking. I'm going to welcome on the chair of the Keir Starmer campaign, Jenny Chapman. While she's taking her seat, let's go to John Pinar, who broke this story, the BBC's deputy political editor. John, what's happened?
Well, the Information Commissioner is now in possession of the report from the Labour Party, which, as we now know, accuses the Keir Starmer campaign, or two individuals in that campaign, of a breach of data, specifically the Labour Party's mass membership database. It's called Dialogue, and they're looking at that report, looking at that complaint. Now, how long will that take? Well, the Commission, I spoke to them just a moment or two ago, and they were helpfully able to narrow the timing of that investigation down to days, weeks or months. So we'll just have to wait and see how long that takes. But meanwhile, as you know, Joe, plenty of fallout over this, with the Labour Party saying they were doing their duty. They say they were they were reporting a breach of their database, potentially a breach of the Data Protection Act and European law. And meanwhile, around the party, all sorts of recriminations and some accusations in the background of dirty tricks, that this, say some, is an attempt to knock the wheels off Keir Starmer's bandwagon.
Right, and it originated, didn't it, from an accidental, as it was called, breach by the Rebecca Long-Bailey campaign?
It did originate from that. Some time ago, some days ago, Rebecca Long-Bailey's campaign as it were, identified a path which would lead anyone doing it, following the path to the gateway of this database. Now, they say that was not the intention. It was about following this link through that page, through that link, a kind of a trail of digital breadcrumbs. And there was no ill intent there, they say, and no action was taken. And the Keir Starmer side are now saying they were simply investigating that vulnerability in this database with no intention whatsoever to use it, to exploit it in any improper way. And that's really where we are now. And it's turned what had been a fairly sedate leadership campaign into something, well, rather ugly.
Well, absolutely. As you say, it sort of burst open, and certainly in the newspapers with your story. In terms of the actual practical impact on the Keir Starmer campaign, you talked about the investigation. We don't know how long it's going to take. What could that mean for the campaign?
Well, there's been some speculation, I'm sure you know, this morning in parts of the press, that as a result of this investigation, the Keir Starmer campaign could be denied access to the database. On Saturday, nominations close and all parties will have an equal level of access to membership information. It was suggested the Steer campaign may suffer as a result of that. Now, that's not going to happen. I've spoken to people inside the Labour Party and they will not be taking any such action. What they have done and are doing is seeking assurances from the various campaigns that the data, the protected data, will be safe throughout this process.
John Pinard, thank you very much. Jenny, you've already said that all of this is utter nonsense, but how can you be sure that the people who clicked on the link to the database weren't operating outside of party rules?
Well, what's happened here is two members of the Keir Starmer campaign have been accused of committing a criminal act. They have been accused of scraping data. Now, I had to look that up to find out what that meant, and of hacking. And these are very, very serious allegations, and there is no evidence, nothing to substantiate them whatsoever. And what has also happened is that allegation somehow has found its way to John Pinard and has been publicised, including the naming of these two individuals who've been accused of something criminal. Now, you know, this is utter nonsense. This is something that Labour Party members will be just having their heads in their hands over. This is not what we want to see. And, you know, I just think the Labour Party, they need to withdraw that allegation because it is so serious and it's affecting those two individuals who've been named publicly. And I think they need to withdraw that because there is no evidence to support that allegation because it just simply didn't happen.
Right. So you want Jenny Formby, the General Secretary of the Labour Party, to intervene and actually withdraw that allegation?
That allegation needs to be withdrawn because it's unfair to make an allegation as serious as that. Whether or not there's a campaign going on isn't the point. You can't go around making those allegations against individuals and having their names ending up in the public domain. That's not right, and that should be withdrawn.
Right, and you've questioned how this has ended up in John Pinard's hands, whom we've just spoken to. Where do you think it does come from?
Well, I'm not making any allegations. You know, I don't want to sit here and complain about other people making allegations, then make some of my own. I just think that what's happened, you know, isn't right, and it needs to be corrected. And, you know, we're very mindful of our responsibilities around data. Of course we are. Data in a political campaign these days is precious, and it's important that it's protected and dealt with responsibly and in compliance with the law. And I support that approach, of course I do. But what's happened here is that allegations have been flung around of the very, very serious, Joe. This is a criminal act that they're being accused of.
So do you think it's maliciously meant then?
I'm not making... I cannot possibly know the motive. I can't know that. And that's not for me to say. But I do need to protect people who are working on this campaign who've had this accusation laid at their door.
What do you make of this, Stephen?
Look, I have huge respect for Jenny. I think that Keir's been fighting a very good campaign. I'm supporting Lisa Nandy, but I found the whole campaign quite uplifting, actually, in terms of all the candidates being able to set out their stall and talk about the future for our party. And it's a tragedy that it's being dragged down into this mudslinging. What I just really hope is that this could be a 24-hour wonder. And that by this time tomorrow, we're back on to debating policy and about the future of our country and how we can rebuild the Labour Party. And that I just hope that this is going to be a one-day wonder.
Deborah?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a shame for Labour, and all Labour Party members should have their heads in their hands today. Actually, if I was in number 10, I'd be clapping my hands with glee. Absolutely. You know, when we did the work that we did after the election to understand why Labour had lost, there's quite a long list, but one of the top reasons is it's a divided party. You know, this does not help, and it's a shame because, as Stephen says, up until now, the backdrop to the leadership debate had, I think, been quite grown up and civilised and, you know, people arguing about ideas rather than at each other's throats, and it seems to have descended into chaos. It coincides, I think, with Keir Starmer moving ahead so far that it's hard not to have an eyebrow raised.
Is that what's going on here?
All I would say is that what Keir Starmer is doing is something that I don't think has ever been done in the Labour Party before, where he is bringing people from different traditions within the party together, and they are working closely together. They're sharing desks with each other, and they have a sense of purpose and a sense of duty to the country and a desire to change this country and become electable and put right the injustices that we all see every day and we fought for in that election and failed. And they have a sense of mission together from different traditions in the party. And that's something that I don't think's ever happened in the past. And, you know, some people are finding that difficult to get their heads around and to get used to. But the membership wants that. The membership is fed up with this backbiting, infighting, negativity. We need to draw a line under it and we need to move forward as a party together, and that's what Keir Starmer's campaign is all about.
But you see Lisa Nandy as the person to do precisely what Jenny has just outlined.
Look, Lisa is the brave choice in this campaign. She's not as well known as Keir. Keir's
she's
been
struggling,
the
isn't
Shadow
she, to cut
Secretary of
through?
State for Brexit, but the more people see of Lisa, the more they like what they see. And let's just look at the policies she's put forward on dealing with the anti-Semitism crisis. A 7-point plan, incredibly specific, radical change in the way we do our politics in the Labour Party. And I think Lisa would be an absolutely outstanding leader of the Labour Party. But the key thing is, let's make sure that this competition is about policies and ideas and not about mudslinging.
Right, but it is turning ugly, one might say, looking at where you are at this very moment. And we can show you this tweet. It says CLP nominations, that's constituency Labour Party nominations. A certain number are needed by the candidates to make it through after February the 14th, which is on Friday. Darren, let me show you this. Islington North CLP, that, of course, is the CLP in Jeremy Corbyn's constituency, nominates Keir Starmer to be leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner to be deputy leader of the Labour Party, and this CLP nominated Jeremy Corbyn in 2015 and 2016. Is that unifying as far as you're concerned?
I mean, I was pretty shocked to see that Islington North constituency Labour Party had done that. But
who were you expecting?
Well, someone more to the left, I think. Although Keir Starmer is pretty left-wing, they have a wide variety of quite left-leaning candidates this time around. What I would say, though, is as someone who comes from a seat, North West Durham, that just turned Tory, I think this sort of thing is entirely self-indulgent. I can't understand why anyone out there watching this would be thinking the Labour Party is going to win me back, they're going to win me over to them, when we're talking about dirty tricks and tactics potentially to throw people off voting a certain way. I just find it all a bit ridiculous, to be honest.
Well, I mean, that's my worry too, is that people, certainly the public, will look at this in utter despair and bemusement, probably. But it's
They're not looking at it very much,
well,
actually. That's the lucky thing from
No,
point
Deborah,
of
that's
view.
a
Is that
really
true?
important
Yes,
point.
it is true. They're not there. I did focus groups last week, and only one person in each of the two groups I did could name any of the candidates at all. They're not looking at the moment, and I think, you know, long may it continue.
Well, but it's really,
on that basis.
That is no doubt true, but members are looking.
Yes,
and we need to get this right for the members of the Labour Party who do not want to go through another night like December the 12th. They want to feel proud of their party and proud of what we stand for, and they want to knock on doors and be able to speak with utter confidence and to champion the values that we all believe in. And that's what Keir is trying to do. Now, when you're doing well, sometimes that does put, a price on your head. But, that won't defect at all from any of what we're trying to do in this campaign, because it really does matter that we bring this party together and that we make ourselves electable and we were able to change the things that desperately need changing in this country.
Well, on that, and Deborah, you mentioned the focus groups, and Darren talks about why people from where he comes from would vote Labour again. I mean, you previously said, you're writing a book on Labour's Red Wall and the crumbling of it, that the Labour Party has gone from being the party of a pint and a pie to quinoa. What do you mean exactly?
Yes. I mean, it sounds jokey, but actually there's a very serious point underlying that, which is about the kind of, if you like, the culture and the image of the party and the people that it represents, because people look at a political party and they ask, is this a party for me? And there's a group of people who, back in the day, when Labour was the party of a pie and a pint, they thought, I know where I am with Labour, that's where I am. And the move to quinoa, which actually, it was some focus groups I did in Crewe, actually, a couple of years ago. Nobody could spell quinoa, by the way.
Well, I'm not surprised. I don't blame them
nor
for
me,
that.
but I can now because I had to look it up. But basically, what they were saying.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of people think
exactly so.
No, it's quinoa.
Okay.
Exactly so. So what they were saying was that the Labour Party isn't the party that represents people like me anymore. It doesn't sound like me, it doesn't look like me, and it's all about people who live in, you know, kind of North London. And now, this is obviously an extreme point of view, but I think that there is something very serious here to unpick, and of course those cultural differences fall out in other ways as well.
Right, but isn't that what Keir Starmer represents? You know, North London lawyer, he's exactly the candidate of quinoa.
Well, as someone who likes a pie and a pint at any opportunity, and someone who spent, you know, most of October and all of November and most of December talking to residents in Darlington, which is, you know, quite fond of it.
It's one of the constituencies
it's more pie
I'm going
than
to be
quinoa.
looking at for my book, actually.
Yeah, well, please do, and I'll be very pleased to welcome
Yes.
you. You know, but the name that came back on the doorstep repeatedly was Keir Starmer, and you know, you can ignore that if you want, but actually, I think as a party who wants to be in government, we do need to listen to what people are telling us.
It's at a low level, but he is actually the best known of the candidates so far.
And he has the credibility, he has the backstory, people look at him and they think, yes, I can trust him with my children's futures, with my pensions, with my mortgage, and that, whether we like it or not, that is a large part of what people look at when they want to decide who to be the Prime Minister.
Lisa Nandy, quinoa or pie and a pint?
Oh, she's definitely pie and a pint.
Definitely say pie and a pint.
Absolutely.
You know, Lisa's the MP for Wigan, rooted in those communities. There's a real danger of oversimplifying this, but there is a reality, which is politics is changing in this country, and the old left-right divides are being replaced by issues of values and identity. And I think most people in constituencies like mine and Jenny's recognise that the economic model is broken in this country by 10 years of privatisation, contracting out, austerity. The Tories are wrecking the economy. But they need a party which speaks the language of belonging and identity and empowering local communities. And that's why I'm backing Lisa Nandy, because she has clearly got the strongest story to tell on those issues.
Well, then when it comes to relatability, if that's another way of putting it, Siobhan, I mean, what does Boris Johnson represent, food-wise or as a dish? You know, he is an old Etonian and he appealed in some way.
What is it? Quail. It was quinoa and quail, which
how does that appeal? How does that appeal to sort of former Labour heartlands?
I don't know about food, but what I do know is I've been on the doorsteps and talking to thousands of people, and what came up time and again is that Boris stands up for the country, believes in the country, will fight for the country, and Jeremy Corbyn didn't. And I think we're having this conversation about a very unattractive infighting in the Labour Party leadership at a time where Keir's suffering of a bereavement, his whole family, which is awful, because the Labour Party know he can't come out and support. You're doing a brilliant job for him. But all the Labour candidates stood up and fought to get Jeremy Corbyn into power not that long ago, and I don't think they're dealing with what the public really think about Labour.
But why didn't background hurt Boris Johnson? Why didn't what people think he represents, rightly or wrongly, hurt him in the same way as it seems to be some of the Labour Party candidates?
It's so incredibly interesting, isn't it? Because I think the answer to it is that his positives outweigh the negatives, basically. So what people saw in him, which they liked, at a time where we've been a very troubled country. 70% of us think that we're a very divided nation. They're looking for unity. I asked, but playing a game in focus groups, you know, make Britain blank again, like make America great again. What did they say? Make Britain normal again. Now, what they think is that he is very positive, and actually, as Siobhan says, has sort of self-belief and beliefs in the country. Now, it remains to be seen whether their trust in him, you know, is justified. But that is what they are hoping. And we did a poll in the last few days, actually. 63% say that this is a new era for the country, led by him.
Right.
So it's quite positive.
Is it?
He's in a honeymoon
But
period.
should the Labour candidates then, leadership candidates, be chasing their former heartlands and sacrificing the metropolitan vote where they did do quite well, or can they do both?
I mean, how they can build this, they need to build a new coalition. Any political party depends on pulling together a coalition of voters. And first off, they need to decide what kind of party they want to be. And I think that that's the fundamental question that has to be answered
Lisa has
first.
talked about building a red bridge. She recognises that Labour wins when we have that coalition of cities and small towns coming together, and it's absolutely crucial that we do that. And we recognise that people in constituencies like mine and Jenny's, they are the people the Labour Party was created to represent. The idea that we would walk away from those constituencies in order to just build up our support in the big cities, I think would not only not make electoral sense, it would be a betrayal of our historic mission as a party. So we have to have that red bridge in place. And Lisa, of course, having been a councillor in Hammersmith and an MP in Wigan, she is actually best placed of all the candidates, I think, to build that red bridge.
Right. In terms of, though, the heartlands that you're talking about and what might attract people to vote Labour again, there is this problem for Boris Johnson of only having those votes lent to him as he sees it. So how precarious do you think that support is?
Well, that's the way it should be, though, right? No one's vote should be taken for granted, ever. But I think there's a little bit of a sense of what the Church of England tried to do in singing Kumbaya with middle-aged men to win over young people to come to the church, right? This idea that what we really need in this country is further class war to win over aspirational working class communities. That is absolutely not what they're after at all.
Right, and is your place temporary then? Because Labour held your seat in 2017. You came in...
Mine's really interesting. Well, it's been won and lost by the Conservatives and Labour for about 20 years.
So it's precarious for you?
Yeah, but I think that is absolutely right. I mean, you shouldn't take any voter for granted. You should be on the doorstep trying to have the best interaction you possibly can with every person. And one of the greatest things about last year was that people were opening their doors that had never voted Conservative before and finding somebody normal, we're not normal because we're all in politics, but, you know, finding someone relatively normal that wasn't necessarily a typical Tory in their mind. And actually, so we've got some really good grounding to then go on and hold that vote.
Jenny?
I mean, I agree with everyone that said that no vote should ever be taken for granted. I don't quite buy this idea that people who live in the north of England in towns like mine are somehow a sort of alien species compared to people who live in North London. In my experience, people generally want to have a safe community, they want their kids to do well, they want a job, they want a car and a holiday.
And the coalition is formed by finding those common threats, obviously.
And I think the Labour Party can do this. I genuinely think that the Labour Party has a chance of winning the next general election if we get this right. But we need to get this right. There is no point the Labour Party spending the next 5 years engaged in internal warfare and factionalism and these kinds of battles. We've got to get this right. If we lose the next election, my son, who's now 15, will be 25 by the time we get another chance. And the country deserves better than that, and the Labour Party can do better than that.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for coming in. We're going to talk about the elections in Ireland because there has been something of an upset, if you like, in terms of traditional results there. Let's go to Dublin. In fact, a cafe in Sinn Féin President Mary Lou McDonald's constituency in Dublin. There is Emma Vardy. Emma, what's happened?
Yeah, just all regrouping a bit after a day of high political drama at the count late last night. That count actually continues because there's a different voting system here in Ireland, so it takes much longer for all the seats to finally be declared. But really, Joe, the top line for all of this is that Ireland's in new territory. What was a two-party system for 100 years is now all about three parties, Sinn Féin surpassing all expectations. Now, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, one or other, has governed Ireland for 100 years, different forms of coalitions over the past 30 years. They are very much the established parties. But such an upset because Sinn Féin, who were once the fourth party, they surpassed Labour to become sort of the third party in the mix. Well, they're now out in front, taking the highest percentage of the first preference votes, which is completely unexpected. There was a poll just leading up to polling day which put them at first place, but a lot of people dismissed that and said, look, it's not going to come to fruition. But it has. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, Sinn Féin would have fielded many more candidates. They haven't fielded enough candidates to win an outright majority. They've done much better than even they expected, and it's completely changed the political landscape in Ireland.
All right, we're going to see some pictures now of the Sinn Féin president, Mary Lou McDonald, celebrating the result for Sinn Féin so far. Let me just warn viewers of some flash photography. What do you think's behind the Sinn Féin surge, Emma?
Well, look, talking to voters, you know, Ireland's economy is doing really well, one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. But People here tell us they're not really feeling the effects of that. There's a really high cost of living, a major housing crisis, people on good wages with good salaries struggling to even get, a room to rent in a shared house, not enough houses being built, problems in the health service. And Sinn Féin were offering some radical left-wing policies, and a bit like the old sort of Corbyn surge that we saw in the UK once upon a time. People are saying, look, this is an anti-establishment protest vote against what have been the dominant parties for such a long time, and some of those left-wing policies are appealing to younger voters, voters who perhaps don't share the sort of historical concerns with Sinn Féin's connections with the IRA, who are looking at their policies. Now, you might have thought Brexit would be a big talking point in this election. Well, here in Ireland, it hasn't been. Largely, Brexit is seen as resolved here. There's a resolution to the border. So it's all about domestic problems in Ireland and voters' frustrations.
Emma Vardy, thank you very much. Get a cup of coffee after staying up all night. Mary Lou McDonald said the support for her party, Darren, is a big statement of change, and that she expected a referendum on Irish unity to take place in the next 5 years or so. What do you say in response?
Well, I say you got a quarter of the vote, both in the Republic of Ireland and in Northern Ireland. Sinn Féin received a quarter of the vote. There is no mandate for a border poll whatsoever. And I'd also remind Sinn Féin that it's not actually in their gift. That the Unionists in Northern Ireland also have a say in this, and that's quite important.
Right, but do you think it's closer, the idea of an all-Ireland poll, at least?
Yes, I do. I mean, essentially, the withdrawal agreement that was finally struck was about throwing Northern Ireland under the bus. It was simply a rehash of the Theresa May deal, but just putting a border down the Irish Sea. Now, that is clearly going to create forces which will push for the reunification of Ireland. What a profound irony that the Conservative and Unionist Party has probably done more than any party in living memory to facilitate the reunification of Ireland.
It's true, the withdrawal agreement isn't popular in Northern Ireland.
Back to Brexit drama immediately from my left. But
just reality.
This is a situation. What I heard from that clip and what I've been hearing over the press coverage of the Irish elections is that the people in Ireland wanted their politicians to concentrate on domestic agenda and domestic issues, and actually they didn't have Brexit on their top number one thing to deal with. And as Darren says, the Sinn Féin got a quarter of the vote. It doesn't mean that we're going to be in referenda territory. There's a lot to do to even form a coalition before we get to the domestic things that people want to address. So I don't think dramatising it is helpful. Stephen?
We have a border down the Irish Sea, so that's clearly going to have an impact on Irish politics and Northern Irish politics. But it's true that domestic politics played a big role, and I think there's a clear signal here, which is if you have a growing economy, okay, you have low unemployment, etc. But if the benefits of growth are not being shared fairly across the population, then you are going to get results like this. So, fair play to Sinn Féin because they've made that point very clearly in this election.
It suits Stephen and Sinn Féin to say that this is an election about Brexit, right? But it absolutely wasn't. They've put forward Ireland currently has rent controls in place, which are exacerbating their housing crisis. Young people, they have one of the worst housing crises in the Western world. People are desperate. That's why they've turned to this radical left party.
Right, but has Brexit changed the game? Because it isn't popular, the idea in Northern Ireland, and Mary Lou McDonald saying, well, it's changed everything politically in Ireland. Does it mean Brexit has been a factor?
I think what we are seeing reflected here is the kind of polarisation of views that we're seeing in lots of other places as well, including here. And I think that's, people want change. The problem is they just don't all want the same kind of change. And that's a real issue. And also, they are going to have to wait quite a long time. I mean, one of the things that struck me, listening to the radio this morning, people are saying it's going to take months to resolve this.
Yes.
How do people feel about that? I mean, here in the UK at this last election, one of the things people feared most was a hung parliament and us being kind of stuck in this stasis forever. I think it's a real problem. People want change,
but what's it going to do to the trade negotiations? Because, I mean, Ireland is an important player potentially in that, and on the side of the EU. We don't know quite the shape or the outline of the government yet in Ireland. Will it make it tougher? Leo Varadkar's been quite tough anyway.
Well, there have been reports that Sinn Féin could veto any trade deal, but I think that's a nonsense. Right, Ireland would be uniquely hit by any tariffs to our trade with the Republic.
Well, we're into the debate then about the future relationship and the extent to which we diverge or converge. The more we diverge, the more friction there'll be in the trading relationship. So it won't be about vetoing. I don't think
Although the
it'll be
government
about
seems to be
striking
quite
a
happy
deal.
about taking a little bit more friction because they think in the end the price will be worth it.
Well, we have to see then the impact on all of those jobs in those constituencies which, as we've agreed, I think lent their votes to the Tories on the 12th of December. You know, if you start to see the collapse of the British automotive sector because of massively increased friction, because we come out of a customs union and out of the single market, then that is a reality in terms of the hit to our economy.
We've just seen
that will have
Nissan
consequences.
commit to this country over Europe, for example, if in the event that there is significant friction to our customs facility, for example.
We don't know how it's going to play out, but we are heading for a cliff edge in December, where a big decision has to be made about divergence or convergence. The more we diverge, the more friction, the more that's going to have an impact on the British economy. It's a very simple equation.
All right, we've talked about Labour. Let's talk about the Conservative Party and domestic policies. Let's show you this headline in the Daily Telegraph. It's actually from Nick Timothy. You may remember him. He was Theresa May's former advisor, the man who was behind her ill-fated 2017 election campaign. It says free market Toryism isn't enough to rebalance a divided Great Britain. Now, there's been some discussion over the weekend and at the end of last week of policies that might come up in the budget in March, things like a mansion tax, you may remember from Ed Miliband, in fact, and cutting pension tax relief. Are these the sorts of policies that you would welcome, Siobhan?
I'm not going to. I mean, it's just speculation at the moment about the budget, and so my focus whenever I get hold of a Treasury official or a minister is to really talk about what Stroud needs, you know, with our trains and our high streets,
Sure.
and really. But so
yeah, but just talking about them as policies themselves, never mind if they are in the budget or not. It's interesting that there's been quite a lot of debate in some of the right-leaning papers. I mean, what are your views on a mansion tax and cutting pension tax relief if it's all about levelling up, as Boris Johnson wants to do?
I campaigned against a mansion tax when Ed Miliband was running with that when I was a councillor many years ago. And I think, you know, when I'm talking to my residents and people, we want to really honour our pledges with low taxes. I'm a low tax Tory. We had a really good manifesto which covers that. So I think that's what we'll be focusing on.
But levelling up does have to be funded, Darren. And does it mean abandoning long-held Tory free market principles?
Absolutely not, no. I mean, if you think about the wealth taxes that we've got in this country, they're some of the highest in the Western world as far as property is concerned. You've got stamp duty, you've got inheritance tax, you've got council tax. People are taxed incredibly highly at the minute. Now, the government's been talking a lot about levelling up, free ports, etc. Really exciting stuff. This would be Britain levelling down. This would be sending a message that says that our economy will not be one that is low tax and open for business. I think it's really patronising, actually, to suggest that the Tories' new voters who rejected these proposals in 2015, 2017 and 2019 somehow want to lurch into like socialism light. That's clearly not the case.
Darren sounds worried.
He does sound a little bit worried, doesn't he? It's interesting, though. I mean, I think that this goes back to our friend the Red Wall and shows how incredibly focused the Tories are. Because, you know, Labour might debate what kind of coalition they want, what kind of party they want. The Tories know that they need to hang on to those votes, and they're going to be working incredibly hard to do that.
Right, so do you think these things could be on the table?
I think they could be on the table. I mean, basically what people told us in the election and immediately afterwards was that they had lent their votes. You know, this was a short-term thing, and as we've all said, no party has the divine right to have people's votes going forward.
Not taking anybody for granted is not ignoring your traditional voters and thinking about the whole of the country as well. And the manifesto spoke to the whole of the country. And that's why we're in a good position as we are with the majority.
Right, but the government's made it very clear, Siobhan, that it wants to invest in parts of the country that haven't seen investment for decades. And that has to be funded and that has to be paid for. So is it worth holding on to those parts of the country newly won by the Conservatives, perhaps by taking away from London and the South East?
The investment for those areas and, you know, South West. So I'm always banging the drum for the South West. There's a lot of chat about the North, but South West got a lot of the same issues and needs as some of the northern country. But, you know, this is the investment projects will come. They will be long-term projects in many states, but not taking anybody for granted in the meantime is very important.
So they're moving to the left economically and they're going to stay on your lawn.
Parking their tanks on our lawn. I mean, look, the biggest scandal in this country, I think, in terms of the economy is that the gap between London and the southeast and the rest of the country is the largest in the entire northern European area. And that has to be changed. We need that rebalancing. You've got to pay for that. I think a mansion tax is a step in the right direction. What we need is a root and branch review of council tax. Council tax valuation, house valuation, hasn't been reviewed since the 1990s in England, early 2000 in Wales. So you've got to do that. You've got to pay for it. But I think what we're seeing here is that Boris Johnson has not landed this new Keynesian Tory economics with his own party. And we're seeing very clearly from colleagues around this table that it's going to be very difficult for him to actually put this into the new DNA of the Conservative Party. And we need a new leader in place who will be able to step in when that happens.
But this will alienate traditional Tory support, won't it?
Well, I think it'll alienate a lot of people. I don't think the new Tory voters want to start a class war. They don't want... It depends what you class as a mansion, right? If you bought a house in London under Margaret Thatcher's right to buy, that could be classed as being a high-value property, but it's quite clearly not a mansion.
And the difference in property costs between, you know, the Red Wall constituencies in London is very... might well suggest that maybe, you know, the Conservatives are shifting their gaze in that direction rather than the London direction. I think that's quite important.
Well, that's potentially
£1 million buys you a, you know, two-bedroomed flat or terraced house in London, and it really would buy.
We need to be talking about things like stamp duty. People just aren't moving houses or downgrading to a smaller house because of stamp duty. They cannot afford to do it. They cannot afford to take that hit.
But what sort of Tory party is Boris Johnson leading now, Siobhan? Because it is different, isn't it? It feels different. I mean, is it still the party representing traditional Tory interests? You've written a piece where you would like a minister, a families minister, to help stay-at-home parents. Why?
I didn't write that piece. I was a signatory to a letter. So this is a piece. You know, I prior to coming into politics, I was a family law solicitor, and then I worked for a charity that specialises in strengthening families. And what we want to do is make sure that families that are making choices have got that backing in policy, and that has been lacking. So, you know, working parents that decide to stay at home, I think there is lacking in policy. I think we do need to look at childcare and things like that. And to your point about what type of Conservative Party that we're leading country, it's an exciting one. You know, we've got voices all over the country that we haven't had before, and we've got really good influence on new types of policy, and it's a good thing.
Would you welcome a minister representing stay-at-home families and parents?
Well, if the Conservative Party is really going to care about this sort of thing, they should reopen the thousands of Sure Start centres that they closed down over the last 10 years. I mean, I think we can have as many different ministers and committees as we want. Fundamentally, it's about the policy, it's about the investment. Sure Start did more than any other policy to help young families, and it's an absolute scandal that the Tories have shut down thousands of Sure Start centres.
You mentioned the Red Bridge of Lisa Nandy. Let's talk about another bridge. Tom Newton-Dunn, political editor of The Sun, has tweeted this. Number 10 confirms for first time work is underway on the building of a bridge between Scotland and Northern Ireland. Scoping report being drawn up for the Prime Minister. Deborah?
Wow, I've never heard anybody in a focus group say they want that. It doesn't mean they don't.
Do you think it will actually happen? Anybody?
I probably wouldn't put money on it, but I don't know.
Darren?
Apparently, architecturally, it's pretty hard to do. With engineering required, it's pretty difficult.
I mean, I'm not an engineer, but it probably does sound quite a feat.
I can imagine it does sound rather difficult. But what I would say is that there's disjointed thinking here, right? We're building this HS2 Birmingham to London high-speed rail project at a time when people can use their Wi-Fi so long. These cutting 20 minutes, 40 minutes off of a journey really doesn't matter. If you want to focus on Scotland, Northern Ireland, and areas in the north, let's focus on them instead of this high-speed rail project.
Yes or no to a bridge?
I don't know. Actually, I protected my brain from Twitter before coming on here, so I had not thought about that one.
Well, imagine a bridge from Scotland to Northern Ireland, something you'd like to see?
We've got red bridges and Northern Ireland bridges. I mean, we are committed to infrastructure projects.
I think we should take a look at Boris Johnson's track record on building bridges. The Garden Bridge, millions and millions of pounds of taxpayers' money wasted on a vanity project. It ended up being a bridge to nowhere, which I hope will be a metaphor for this government.
All right, a bridge to nowhere, Sir Stephen. That's all we have time for. Bye-bye.